Good morning, everybody. Happy Sunday to you. Welcome to Coffee Break. My name is Spencer Campbell, aka Gila RPGs, and this is Coffee Break. Every Sunday morning, I hang out with my friends and cool folks in the indie TTRPG scene. We share a cup of coffee or whatever warms us, and we just chat about whatever is kind of either exciting to us this week or things that we're really that we're working on or our passions. Today, I'm going to be learning a lot about art, which I'm excited about because I am joined by the amazingly, incredibly talented JN Butler. JN, would you mind introducing yourself to the fine folks at home?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm JN. They, them pronouns. I'm a freelance illustrator, mostly doing like fantasy horror stuff, sci-fi, landscapes, creature design, that kind of thing. A little bit of character stuff. Um, I'm colorblind, so I mostly work in black and white. That's kind of my comfort zone, and where I do all of my Ickermancy and ink and everything. But I also work in color sometimes, using a lot of color theory stuff to kind of make up for my disability. I especially like using like Silver Age comic like halftone screen colors and stuff like
Yeah.
that and make stuff pop. Um, and I do a lot of work with like indies and co-ops. Shout out to Sandy Pug Games, which is like kind of my home base. Do a lot with that whole awesome crew. Yeah, but I've been fortunate to have like touch points with a lot of different creators across a lot of different games. Outside of that, I work full time as a sysadmin for a pediatric hospital. I've got a few kids, and I love Lego. That's me.
Ooh, that's a fun last fact.
Yeah.
Um, have you been a Lego person like your whole life? Have you always just Is
Yes.
there a name for
Although,
Lego people like brickheads or something like that? I feel like there needs to be a
so
name.
yeah, so AFOLs is the thing that gets used a lot, which is adult fans of Lego.
Okay.
Um, uh, but but yeah, brickheads, just Lego fans. I
Nice.
don't know any of that. That's good. I just really love Lego. It's a good uh, distraction for me. Uh, I have a lot of Lego. This cart behind me is all Lego stuff. That's like my cart for like making stuff.
Is it all like organized and everything? Like,
I have it. I'm getting there.
okay.
I've got a bookshelf here that's got all my like bins that I've got separated by part type and stuff. So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Because I do a mix of like making pre-built or like the sets from Lego, but also I like to design my own stuff too.
See, it's the
So
latter that I think I'd be really, really bad at. It's why I never could like understand the concept of something like Minecraft, where they're like, build whatever you
uh-huh.
want. And you're like, what do you mean build whatever you want? I need like
Yeah,
I need a map. I need
yeah.
a blueprint to follow. Um, I loved Lego as a kid. Like I there's still a giant tub somewhere in my parents' basement, I'm sure, that has all of
Yeah,
my Lego half-built things just all crushed together into one box,
yeah.
but maybe I need to go pick up some stuff from their house anyway and move it to my house. Maybe I'll grab my Lego and
I think it's worth playing with. I will warn you though that if you get back into it and you get really back into it, that it can be a bit of a deep rabbit hole.
excellent.
So
Well,
yeah,
when I get into something, I tend to get into it pretty hard. So that's the
yeah,
other danger is like, okay, well,
yeah,
this is my whole life now is Lego and
right,
bye
yeah,
everybody.
yeah. That's me for sure. Like the ADHD hyperfixation kicks in hardcore, and uh, um,
All
but
right.
thankfully Lego is one of those things that like keeps giving dopamine, so I haven't dropped it.
Excellent.
Yeah,
It still keeps coming back.
yeah.
Dan Phipps in chat mentions this is the problem finding all your old Warhammer stuff in the attic. Yeah,
Uh,
I've that's still lingering in my parents' basement as well, which is a very expensive discovery. Oh, I don't want to think about how much money I put into that. Whew, too much. As a high schooler, I don't even know where I got that cash to spend the unreasonable amount that I did, but not a good idea. Not a good idea. Well, I'm really excited to talk about all of the stuff that you talk, obviously the Lego stuff, but all the other stuff you talked about as well.
Sure.
Being an artist, doing commission work, the co-op thing that you've been working with, the cool license that you're doing, and the colorblind thing, which I
Yeah.
only learned recently. I think I learned that you were colorblind when you did a thread talking about the Wander Home cover that you were working on. I
Yeah.
I think you talked about it then. Um,
Yeah.
do you mind talking just a little bit about that? Or
Sure.
yeah,
Yeah,
I'd love to know
totally. That's
more.
that's a great thing to jump into. I'm colorblind. I've got protanopia, which is red-green color blindness. But basically means that like I have a deficient number of um, cones for that are red receptors. So stuff that sort of relates to the red color family or has red wavelengths in it. I tend to have issues with seeing um, because my eyes don't get enough input, and so my brain doesn't get enough data, and brains don't like not knowing things, so your brain makes shit up and is like, we've decided this is this color because we don't really know. Um, and so in some cases I see the incorrect color. Sometimes I see the correct color, but like that like hold not enough data thing just
Mm,
means um I can't name it. Like
yeah.
it's like nothing. I'm trying to grab onto something to give me like a clue, and it's just like hard to. Um, I tell people sometimes like there's this color that I don't think anybody else experiences, but I call it orange, which is like something that's simultaneously green and orange. I'm like, it's definitely one of these. Uh,
Interesting.
and it feels like both at the same time. So, anyways, as you can imagine, that kind of causes problems with interpreting color for using it in something or like choosing color and applying it. Um, so that's kind of been like a struggle for me,
Mm,
all throughout making. I've been making art since I was a kid, but I like majored in it in high school and then also got my BFA in art and drawing um, after that. And color was always a struggle for me. And so in a lot of cases, I avoided it and primarily worked in black and white and grays and things like that, just because it was more comfortable. I didn't have to confront it. But once I started getting into making digital art, um, like kind of around the advent of the iPad and
mm,
stuff like that, um, so maybe for like the past I don't know, decade-ish, a little shy of that. I started experimenting with color because it was a little lower risk, right? Instead of using that $40 tube of like
mm.
oil paint or whatever that like if I use incorrectly is feels awful. It felt like a lower barrier to entry to experiment and try stuff out. So I started like playing with using color but got really frustrated with it until I started like trying to kind of reel in some of what I was doing, try and do less like hyper realistic rendering with it, and like be like, okay, well, let's practice fundamentals. Let's go back to like stuff I was learning year one in school of like
Mm.
color theory, and like these are the colors I do know, and I know their complements, and um, I know where stuff is on the color wheel. So if I know that here's a blue that has an orange complement, like even though the orange is kind of hard to see, I know that if I pick an orange like as a highlight, it'll you know work well together with this, and then I can kind of get it double checked by my family around me who can see color and be like, does this look okay? I think theoretically this should be good,
Right.
and on paper in math, this is great, but visually, how does it look? So that's kind of how I compensate for that. But it still can be frustrating, and it is a slow process
Mm.
for me. It's the slowest part of my workflow for sure. Um, uh, yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, it's absolutely fascinating to me that, and it makes sense to use the color theory using the like you understand the theory, If the theory is
Hmm.
sound of the color wheel and everything like that, then the art should all then it should look good. And
Yeah, it should work out.
it's so interesting how then like like you said, you show it to your family or other people like that. And I'm curious when you do that. Is it typically like, yeah, okay, you were on the right track, or do you ever find like you're like, in theory, this should work, and then other people are like, no, this is not. Just
Yeah,
doesn't
I mean,
work.
sometimes it doesn't work. Yeah, I mean, like, I do have cases where, like, I think I've used the right color, but somewhere along the way with filters or
Mm.
um, the way colors have been layered or things like that, a color shifts in a way that I haven't been able to account for, and like something that was like like an ochre dark or a yellow kind of color
Mm.
has shifted. There's like too much black in it and it's shifted more green, and I don't realize that, and all of a sudden I've got like a green hue along the horizon, which
Mm.
can be a vibe but is maybe not the vibe I'm going for. um so that tends to be where like family is helpful in catching that for me. But I do use some other like aids for that too. Like
Mm.
I have an app on my phone that uses the camera, so you can point it at things and it'll tell you like generally what color it is.
Oh, cool.
And it's pretty accurate, but lighting has to be good. Um, and if you're pointing it at a screen, it's hit or miss because sometimes um, like the camera on the phone is too good. So if you're too close, it's like picking up the LEDs or like,
Oh,
whatever.
yeah.
And it's like, well, that's too precise.
Yeah.
That's not going to help in this situation. So, but Procreate is the main app I use to draw, and they recently, in their latest like big update they did last fall, added a feature where whenever you pick a color, you can enable a preference that it'll give a label at the top of the screen that just sort of like fades in and out briefly that tells you a name for that color. So it'll be like, oh,
Oh.
dark cyan blue, or it'll say like just orange or
Yeah.
whatever, and it may not be like super precise, like it's not using names like chartreuse or like some of the more poetic names that we have for colors, but it at least like is helpful for validating like I meant to choose this color, that wording aligns with the color I intended to choose.
Right.
And so that helps a lot too, and the color dropper uses that as well. So like so I can do a little more of the validation myself now in the app rather than having to check with people.
That that's awesome. That's in one of their later up or latest updates on
Yeah,
Procreate
yeah.
then.
So definitely like uh, a strong argument for the rewards of including accessibility
Yeah.
options and things.
I have Procreate on my iPad. I got I got it recently. I'm no artist, but I've been dabbling, and it's a fun
Mhm.
program to play around with. Just like,
Yeah.
you know, I tinker on my own with stuff. Even I just like create vibe pages of just like, all right, let me just use a bunch of different brushes and colors just to be like, this evokes the idea, the vibe of the game I'm working on. Even if none of it is art I'll use, it gives me a sense of
Sure.
the game. And then I do like a bunch of like tutorial YouTube videos where like you can draw this in Procreate, and then I like follow along. That's fun.
Yeah.
It's cool. It's a cool program.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I think it's great for like, it's a low barrier of entry kind of program where like most of the stuff you just want to try out is pretty simple to get used to, but it also has a lot of depth for like more advanced stuff once you really get into it in terms of kind of the things that people who come from more of a traditional is maybe kind of a confused word to use with it, but a traditional digital background in like using Photoshop with a
mm,
Wacom tablet and that kind of thing, um, where you've got um, the wide breadth of features of something like Photoshop, and the whole GUI for all of that is in your face, potentially depending on how you customize it. But Procreate sort of tries to get out of the way,
mm,
which is um, great if that kind of thing works for you. For me, it does because it's less distracting. Um, but it also means that it can be a little hard to get used to some of the advanced features because they're sort of like hidden away.
right.
But
Yeah,
yeah,
I'm still learning new fun little tricks all the time. Every time I open it
yeah.
up, I'm like, oh, I had no idea it could do this. So definitely check out Procreate if you're interested at all in dabbling with this sort of stuff. So you've been, how long have you been doing commissioned work? Because I
Um,
know
yeah.
I've as long as I've seen you, you've been doing it. When did you get started with it?
So I started doing commission stuff maybe about 4 years ago.
Okay.
4 or 5, actually maybe closer to 5 years at this point. Um, I've done art for a while. I've sold like art that I've done. I did some comic stuff for a while,
Mm,
made like mini comics and that kind of thing. But um and I've for a long time also actually since I was like an undergrad in like '04 to '08, um, did commissions for like t-shirt designs and stuff for like bike races and my friends like shops and stuff like
yeah.
that. But that was all like one-offs, like maybe one or two things a year, and for a pittance kind of thing, like nothing I could really like claim as it was mostly like beer money kind of
Sure.
thing, you know. And sometimes it just literally was beer, or things along those lines. Um, but more like making a concerted effort to like, okay, um, I'm gonna get serious about making art on a regular basis and trying to get commission work, like get people to know who I am, see my portfolio, and like want to commission me and not excuse me, um not do so much of the like please give me a job kind of thing.
Mm.
Which you still have to do, but and that was there was a lot of legwork of that kind of like I you have to do a lot of pitching. um but anyways, I don't know, I'm jumping around a lot. Yeah, like 5 years or so. And that sort of aligns with like honestly when my kids became all sort of more independent and I had more of the free time to commit to that because my kids are aged at this point, um, uh, 8 through almost 14.
Mm.
Um, so they all kind of hit that school age point where I was like, okay, I've got some more time to myself in the evenings.
Yeah.
Even like before they're in bed, I can actually do stuff sometimes. Uh, so that opened up that space for me.
That's awesome. Um, I want to talk to you about like the experience of being like a commissioned artist in like the RPG space, and
Yeah,
as especially as somebody who has commissioned art. It is such it's a it's a dance you learn. There's like etiquette to it that I feel like you don't learn until you just like you try and then you realize you did it wrong and all that sort of stuff. Like, and there's all those memes of like asking, you ask somebody to commission something and they say, "What's your rate?" and you say, "What's your budget?" and something like
right.
that, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah. The standoff.
yeah, right. So like,
Yeah,
can you like, I guess like, what is like what's some advice for folks out there? Because I'm still learning it as I'm commissioning artists.
sure.
Like, because every artist I've
So
worked with is different. Sorry. Yeah.
yeah, oh no, that's yeah, I think that there's uh in freelancing, I think probably not unique to art, but certainly I know it from art. There's like not there's not a great like yeah, here's the standard way
Right.
you do this. There's not like a formula. There's plenty of advice, but everybody's advice is different. And so my experience has been like maybe kind of a maybe a bit of a foundation, like the different types of ways that as a freelancer you
Mm,
might make income with your art, particularly in RPGs. There's royalties. That's a big thing in like the DTRPG kind of scene, and DM's Guild,
mm,
which DM's Guild was sort of like the first place that I got some work in the scene. Uh, I don't really do royalty work as much anymore because it's an accessible way for like anthology teams and stuff to kind of make a project together because you don't really need funds up front necessarily. Everybody's committed to just like, you're going to get said cut. You agree on whatever cut on the front end, and um, um, but you're not getting paid upfront at all, or
Mm,
not getting paid like a set price necessarily. So there's some risk associated with that, but it tends to be the kind of like when you're starting out, easier jobs to get, because um, you know, folks are like, hoping for people who are willing to take that risk along with them, and are a little more willing to kind of work with folks they maybe aren't as familiar with necessarily.
yeah, and
And
if you don't have the cash in pocket to pay the artist up front, the royalty approach
yeah,
might be the more appealing thing if it works for
yeah,
you, sort of thing.
yeah. And sometimes it's great, and I think it depends on how you work as an artist sometimes too, like your speed, or like how comfortable you are with that sort of like, I'm going to draw this now and maybe not see the return on it till later kind of thing. um but then, yeah, then there's just like, setting rates, and uh you know having working with people who are paying up front, or paying partially up front, and partial upon completion, or working with groups that are fundraising. So like
Mm,
maybe you're doing a little bit of work kind of pro bono up front for marketing purposes and stuff, but hopefully like, you've got a itch fund or Kickstarter, or kind of wherever that's living, that if that's fun successfully, then you're getting paid in a more traditional
mm,
kind of like, yeah, here's the contract, here's what you're getting paid up front, and all that. Um, there is a bit of variety to it. Um, and My experience of it has been, everything works best when you're just transparent.
yeah,
And like, both recognize that it's, on both sides of like the commissioner and commissionee, like, um, this is about money, and
right.
that's uncomfortable for a lot of people. It's still uncomfortable for me in some scenarios, but I think the thing that has made it more comfortable for me, and this is sort of advice for artists, to both, I think, get paid in a more consistent manner, or a consistent amount. And also it helps the people that commission you like have a smoother experience, is to try and establish some rates that are relatively clear,
Mm,
and put them somewhere that's accessible. Beside, it's helpful to have it like on your like pinned tweet or whatever, like some folks do that, or um but having, your own portfolio website and something there, that talks about your rates, I think is great. Uh but So then you can kind of give a sense of like, okay, here's the types of things that I'll do, and for how much, and reach out and we'll work out an exact quote, but you can kind of get a general idea based on this. And that way, when somebody's reaching out to commission you, they sort of like know generally what they're getting into, and you can feel confident in giving a quote without feeling like, oh, maybe I should reel this back a little
mm,
bit. That was a big thing for me early on, is like, okay, I'm going to set a rate. And then somebody would be like, hey, I want to do this with you. And then I'd be like, cool, my rate is normally 150, so yeah, I'll do that for $50, like,
uh,
because I would be like, I want this job,
right.
uh and like I feel bad charging this for it, like
Mm,
for some reason that I don't know why, but it feels weird, so I guess I won't charge it. And But if you have those things set publicly, and somebody finds you through those means, they're reaching out after seeing how much you charge, and so you
right.
can feel a little more comfortable, um uh, being sort of resolute in what your rates are.
Yeah, I you mentioned and this in this you reminded me of something that I'm curious because you have a very unique perspective on this or approach to this, and I'm just curious because and I think it's relatively new. When I've been looking for artists in the past, one thing that I notice a lot is when I'm looking at rates that they have posted, it's oftentimes I see things for like for personal use only, right? So a lot of people
Hmm.
are like it's commissioned art for like for creating like your OCs or
Yeah.
I want a portrait of my D&D character or something like that, right? But I want stuff for commercial use.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's either like not there in the rate or it's its own separate thing. So
Hmm.
I'm curious if you have, and I know you have thoughts because you have your own sort of approach to doing
Yeah.
this, but like, what is that like? Have you, I guess maybe even before you've sort of taken the approach that you did, like, what's the when you're an artist and you're deciding between doing something like commercial rate versus like private rate, what kind of goes into that? Do you have a sense?
Yeah, so I think and like a lot of things it varies, but when when I was like kind of first getting into doing commissions, my sense of it was like my commercial rate is my base rate and personal is like a discount on that
Mm,
sort of because like you're not going to use it for commercial reasons. You're not making money off of this. So I'll do it for less for you. And I think that that's probably how a good number of people set their rate. But since then, I've sort of kind of flipped that idea where like my commercial rate is more of my default or I'm sorry, let me back up. My personal rate is more of my default,
mm,
and then commercial is sort of like a surcharge
mm,
on that. Because one of the things I recognize is that working over time, I haven't done a ton of personal commissions, mostly commercial, but I do personal sometimes. But I noticed that like, okay, I was charging less because they're not going to use it commercially, but I'm still spending the same amount of time and effort on these. And so um, you know, at the time, I don't think I was charging an amount that was fair to the amount of labor I was putting into that
mm,
work. So that's where I've tried to kind of shift that into like personal is like this is the lowest I would work on a piece of art for. And then commercial is sort of a step beyond that. And then now I kind of set commercial stuff um, even stratify it a little bit beyond that based on like who the publisher is,
mm.
right? Like I'm going to charge an independent publisher on itch less than I'm going to charge like Paizo
Right.
um, or Wizards of the Coast or something like that, where it's like, well, are you $1 billion corporation or are you somebody who's like saved your itch payouts for like 6 months to commission a single piece. Like
Right.
there's a very different dynamic there, and I want I'm going to charge you differently because also your audience is different too.
Mm.
Um, so um, yeah, I don't I think I answered your
Yeah, you
question.
absolutely did.
Yeah,
It's,
yeah,
it's just it's one of those many things that in the process of commissioning art over, the 2-ish years I've been doing this, it's one of those things that I learned. I'm like, oh, okay, so there's different rates depending on a whole bunch of different things. And then I also learned that there's different rates based off of commercial and personal and
yeah,
you mentioned the use of royalties. I like you said, I haven't seen the royalties thing as often when I'm looking around at artists, but I do see it pop
yeah,
up from time to time. Um,
yeah. I think it tends to be a thing that artists are less inclined to offer and more inclined like when they're looking for work are like, okay,
mm,
yeah, I'll do royalties. Like I used to actually have a thing on my site that like, hey, if if my rates like fall kind of outside of what works for you, maybe we can work something out with royalties, reach out and we can talk about it. Um, but I don't have that on my site anymore just because I tend to the only times I do royalties anymore um tend to be with people I'm close with,
mm,
whether it's like a close working relationship or actually friends with, um, because it's more like, okay, this is a thing we're making together. Like we want to make it, um, but none of us have the funds for it, kind of thing.
right.
But like we're committed to this idea, so let's we'll all work on royalties, kind of thing, versus things where it's like someone I don't know who's
Mm,
organizing a project. I don't tend to do that anymore.
yeah. Well, I want to talk about your comrade's license because it is
Yeah, yeah.
it is so cool. When I guess I'm not going to try and describe it because I won't do it nearly the justice, but I think this is the first time I've seen something like this. It is an unbelievably cool license. So what is this approach that you use?
Sure. So, uh, maybe first, like most people are familiar with Creative Commons
Mm,
licensing, which is it's an open source licensing format with a variety of different types of licenses you can apply, commercial, non-commercial, what kind of credit you can provide, what kind of like um, whether or not if you use the work, whether you have to use it identically or you're allowed to do transformative works,
Mm,
things like that. And I think it's a great option for a lot of different things, and I think it's great that it exists. But when I started looking at using that as a licensing model for some work, um, especially work that I wanted to like make available to the scene, a problem that came up, and I've seen a number of people talk about this as like a concern sometimes, is like I want to make this open to everybody, but I don't want um, some corporation
mm,
to get my work for free when like they have the budget to pay artists. This is intended for creators as an accessibility option when other art is not accessible to them, not and not accessibility as something related to disability, but something related to like financial accessibility.
right.
Um, uh, and the folks who are just getting started in the scene, and like art plays a lot into like what gets um, what's visible and like what gets traction, and uh like it would be great if good art is available to folks
Mm,
to so but again, like not getting exploited, the art not getting exploited, like how do you make it sort of like equitable to everybody involved, including the artist. Um so I had been talking with the folks in Sandy Pug about this for a while because I had, as I've been doing commissions, I've been reevaluating my rates and licensing models, like and contracts, like on a constant basis. I'm constantly thinking like, how do I make this easier to read? How do I make it easier to understand? How do I make sure I'm getting paid an amount that is reasonable? How do I make sure I'm charging an amount that's reasonable? And then like, how do I make sure it's licensed in a way that works for in people's uses and all that? Um, and we had talked frequently about like the difference between Creative Commons and but then that hurdle of like corporations being able to
mm-hmm.
potentially use it. Not that there's a trend of that happening necessarily, but the possibility of it hovering there is doesn't feel good.
Sure.
Um, so and also the possibility of like other people who like the people who steal art for t-shirts and stuff like
Mm,
that. There's all that too that you potentially open the door to. Uh, so Nem had created a license for Monster Care Squad, um, for the Aldemura setting and historical society thing
yeah.
that she and the rest of the crew had made for the grants they did out of the Kickstarter for that. And um, but so as they were releasing, like, okay, here's sort of like the SRD or kind of kit that you've got available to you for rules and art and all that. This is the license we've made for this. And Mem had formatted that in a basically like a FAQ sort of format.
Mm,
It's not like a contract or not like you would normally see a license. It was just like, what is what is this license? Um, are there any restrictions? What do you have the ability to um, uh, make or not make and all that? And it just was like super easy to read. It was very concise, very low on legalese and all that.
mm,
And uh, it just um, it was brilliant. Like I hadn't seen something written that way for that purpose before. And I asked like, hey, this is super inspiring. This feels like the thing that I've been trying to hit on, but haven't been able to land on or haven't had the motivation to like do something with. Would you be okay with me riffing on this? Um, and uh, and yeah, so that everyone was cool with that. So I wrote a version that was that that license for Monster Care Squad is written in a way that's pretty specific to making content for Monster Care Squad,
mm,
because that was the intention of it, is for that content. So I wanted to make one that would be something I could use, but also anyone else could. as well. So make it more just like about art, and art could be writing, it could be visual, it could be video
Mm,
content, basically anything that's not ephemeral. Um, and um, yeah, so it's written in the Creative Comrades license is sort of what I arrived at as that interpretation. But I do like have to preface it with that like um, Nem was first on
mm,
this for sure, and I don't know if she'll have input on like if there was something that preceded that for them that was you know the first thing on their end with uh, something like that. But that was my touch point,
mm,
my inspiration for it, and so like I have to give a lot of credit there for sure. Um, but yeah, so it's in like an FAQ format. It's pretty straightforward. You can see it at creativecomrades.org. It's also linked from my website, which is just jnb.art or jnbutler.art. You can get to it either way. Um, and the basic concept of it is that it's a license sort of like a Creative Commons um, commercial license, but with some restrictions that I think are a little more protective for small creators.
mm,
So it has some restrictions on it related to, if your income for the past 3 fiscal years is greater than or equal to $1 million a year, um, you need you need to purchase a license for this art. Like
mm.
you can't use this art free. You are in a bracket of income that you have the ability to to pay for this.
Right.
Um, but otherwise, and this I think applies to most people, if you're under that, um, use this art. Like the only restriction is essentially the main restriction is credit.
Mm,
Give credit that this art is by the creator of the art, somewhere that is not hidden, but visible somewhere in what you're making. It doesn't have to be like right on the art or like ruining the aesthetic of your stuff. But if you've got a credits page or whatever, make sure that's there. But also a few other things that Creative Commons doesn't take account to, like being able to specifically say you're not allowed to use this for works that um, uh, are derogatory
mm.
towards marginalized people, or but also with the caveat that you are more than welcome to use it to talk shit about turfs and millionaires and billionaires and um, like to make that distinction that like this is a license that's intended to
Yeah.
um, empower creators, the proletariats, our comrades, and not be something that is intended for use by corporations.
Yeah. It
Um,
it's so cool. I mean, it is I put the link there in chat for folks to check out because I mean, it is like you said, sort of unlike any other license that I've seen in terms of how it's organized and I just think this is such an unbelievable resource for folks who have because you said this early on, like art is one of those things like it draws you in. It can be the thing that like wow, I look at that cover, right? You look at 10 million HP planet and you go holy shit, I want to know more about that, right? Which is a cover that JN did. And for a lot of folks, like you said, some of them are saving up their itch payments for months on end to get that one piece, and it can be a huge barrier as well. So, um,
yeah, yeah. So that's kind of the second piece of this, right? Like I worked on the license, but then it was like, okay, well now I want to make some of my work available with this license. So on my website, there's a link to a Google Drive folder that I have that at this point, I forget how many pieces I have in it. It's like around 40 or something like that,
it's
pieces of art
substantial. I'll place it in
um,
chat here.
that a mix of black and white and color works that are licensed under this. So I'm aware of at least a couple folks who have used it, taken advantage of the art so far, used it on covers or interior stuff. Um, so yeah, it's just art that like it's stuff I've made that either I've made an agreement with the original commissioner that it can be used in this way, or stuff that I just made and never got used in something, or under a variety of circumstances, uh, I've I've been able to put here so
Mm,
that anyone can use it as long as they're meeting the terms of the Creative Comrades license agreement. Um, and my one of the things whenever I work on my rates, like trying to figure out what making adjustments to my commission rates, is I'm always trying to find that balance between like I have I want to be compensated fairly
mm,
for my work, especially as somebody who's been a working artist in a variety of fashions, maybe not just in tabletop, but in a variety of contexts for a decade and a half. I have a lot of experience, and even when I'm hard on myself, I recognize that I have a skill level that allows me to work professionally, and I want to make sure that I'm getting paid fairly. But I also don't want to price myself out of working with the people I want to work with.
mm.
Like I love working with co-ops and indie creators and small publishers and people who are making weird stuff that just isn't you're not going to see published by in other places necessarily, and people
Right.
who I feel like I don't have to interact with through a bureaucracy, like all that kind of stuff. I don't want to price myself out of that. So there's always like it's like trying to find the balance in my pricing. And I do some of that through like having different tiers of commission rates depending on like the size of your outfit or whatever, whether you're a small publisher or a big publisher or a
Mm,
corp, whatever. Um, but also like that was sort of the end goal of this Creative Comrades license was there are going to be some folks who can't afford my rates, but are people that I still would love to work with or still would love to see my art associated with the things they make because they're making really cool stuff. But I don't, with a family, with a full-time job, with the freelance work I do, I don't necessarily have the time to commit to unpaid work
right.
frequently. I do a little of it, but I don't have a lot of time for that. So uh, uh, so I wanted a way to do that so that I could still um, make art with those people, have our art collide together, and this seemed like a good solution for that.
It's such a cool solution. It's I love seeing, like you said, it's a form of accessibility related to financial accessibility and just working with people and sort of meeting them at their needs, but also meeting your own needs. It's very cool because, um, yeah, I mean, like you said, plenty of folks will just make the exception and be like, yeah, I'll just do it for free, or I'll do it for five
Uh-huh.
bucks or whatever. And I'm like, that's not
Yeah,
what you should be paid for the thing that
yeah,
you that you're doing.
yeah. And sometimes you do that. Sometimes it's like, you know what? I can't. I can make that work right now. I
Yeah.
can. I can do that for nothing or an extreme discount or whatever. But a lot of times you can't. And uh, it's not fair to ask artists in any medium to have that expectation
Mm.
of working for exposure or for royalty rates that
Right.
are insulting, um so I think that this is that compromise of like, um this art has been published somewhere before potentially or whatever,
Mm.
but people use stock art all the time, and it's the same scenario there. Um uh and this is just another type of stock art in a way, but licensed with a licensing model that doesn't have a pay barrier,
Mm.
and also, yeah, protects the artists from their stuff ending up places they don't really want it to end up.
Yeah.
So
It's super cool. It's very, very cool. And it's relatively, I feel like this is relatively new as a new model for you, right? Like this is in like the last couple of
yeah, I
months.
so I had been prepping it towards the end of last year with the goal of launching at the beginning
Mm.
of 2022. So that's what I did. I launched it at the beginning of this year, alongside of my a change in my rates at the same time, because I went from charging a like piece sized base
Mm.
rate model, um, to a day rate.
Oh yeah, I saw that
Uh,
you do a day rate for your
yeah,
work.
yeah. So we could talk about that too, maybe next. But yeah, so I prepped it for a while, kind of run it by some people, gave a preview to some folks to see what they thought, and people seem to like it. So I consider it in alpha still because I
Mm,
would really like to eventually I want more people to use it, not just use my art with that license, but I want other people to license their work with this license, and I hope to eventually see people want to be contributors to the
mm,
license, and so that we can rev it into a beta, and then a public 1.0 version um, that is more finalized, and catches the things that I missed in terms of like, well, have you considered this or that? Because I built it from sort of a combo of my and Nem's experience, right? Because I
mm-hmm.
modeled it off of some of what Nem wrote, and put some of my own spin in it. Um, but I want to like, what else do people see in there, want in there, and eventually I don't want it to be my thing. Like I want it to be um, it feels weird to have something called Creative Comrades
Mm,
that is uh, sort of managed by a singular individual. So I don't want to own it. I want it to become a community
mm.
resource. And eventually, there's a group of stewards of the license responsible for edits and revisions and um, new dot releases and all that kind of thing. So I hope it gets there
Yeah.
eventually. So yeah,
Me too. Me too. I hope it gets there. I do want to talk about the day rate thing, because I forgot
yeah,
about that because yeah, when I like you said you did like a piece based rate, or like how
hmm
detailed or the size of the piece or something like that. And I think that's what I commonly see, but I remember looking over
yeah,
at your commissions and you do it based off of like the amount of like days that it would take to make it, I think, right?
yeah. So that actually sort of ties into a little bit of like another disability based kind of way of like, or way of working alongside of one of my disabilities. So I've got ADHD and anxiety and depression, but ADHD is sort of like one of the big inhibitors
Mm-hmm.
to me sitting down and doing the work of art, and but um, as I have over like the past year and a half, like actually got an official ADHD diagnosis, and have started taking medication alongside of it that's been very helpful and stuff. Um, one of the things that people often experience with ADHD is time blindness. So this experience of like just losing time when you either are sucked into something, or are experiencing such um, heavy executive dysfunction that you're like not doing anything, and that time of not doing anything eats away at time in a way where you then feel guilt about like,
Mm,
I wasn't productive enough, and like all that kind of thing. um and But I had an impossible time keeping track of how much time I spent on work. Like somebody would say, how many hours did this take you? And I would say, I don't know, I started it in July and it's August, and I worked a lot of, I don't know. I don't
right.
know. Some days I worked the entire day on it. Sometimes I put 15 minutes to it and put it down, and I didn't track any of it. Um, and the idea of tracking it just filled me with instant like disgust. Like fuck that. There's absolutely no way I'm time tracking this. Like that's nonsense. I'm not going to track my hours
Mm-hmm.
or tick off a thing or put a timesheet. That's garbage, which I still feel that way in a lot of ways, but I have at least become a little more self-aware of how long something takes me to make,
Mm.
and a little more. And I've also just gotten faster over time. The more work I do, I get a little faster. Um, so it, and I was realizing, because of my tendency to put a ton of detail and attention and like obsessiveness into my work, regardless of what size it is, that size didn't really make sense as a way of pricing work anymore, because I was
Mm.
doing like quarter page, half page, full page, cover, that kind of thing.
Right.
Um, and I was putting as much effort into a half page interior as I was a cover, um, and in some cases, and but getting paid like sometimes like threefold different amount for
Mm.
that. So it didn't really make a lot of sense in terms of the value of of my work. So with that sort of like ability to actually pay attention to how long things take to make, I thought, okay, I'm going to give this a shot, because I know this is how much time I have during a week to work. I generally
Mm,
work like 6 days of the week on commissions, for at least an hour. Like that's my minimum commitment to doing art every week is at least like 6 hours of work,
mm,
basically. Um, but with the understanding that my tendency is once I get over that hurdle of getting started, which like I can commit to that hour, I fall in the flow of the piece, and then I can put 4 hours into an evening or whatever, and stuff gets done faster than I would expect if I was really only doing an hour every day. But that's like that's kind of like my minimum expectation.
mm,
And with doing that sort of approach to working, which is essentially like a day of work a week. My day rate is sort of like a week rate, but telling people it's a week rate is like uh, if I was working, for the rates I have for a full week work or for a week of work, they'd be ultra low,
yeah.
right? I'd be getting paid like $4 an hour or something. Um, but that is like it takes me a week to do a day of work,
Mm,
basically, is kind of how that works out. So yeah, so I kind of made all that clear on the site. And I do give some examples of like generally speaking, like a half page piece is going to take me like this number of days. So like if you're thinking about asking me for a commission, you can know that like a full page piece is going to be 2 to 4 days of work. And so you can multiply my day rate by that to get a general sense of what I might
mm,
charge. Um, and the day rate is different depending on who you are, or like the end goal, right? So like there's the personal day rate, the independent co-op small publisher rate, the big publisher, and the corporate
right.
rate. Yeah.
Super cool. I mean, it's cool again to see the stratified pricing based off of who people are, and then yeah, finding a way to figure out your rate based off of a system that works for you or that work kind
Yeah.
of functions with the way that you approach art or that you want to think about using your time. It's really cool. I like this concept of the day rate. It makes sense to me because yeah, not every half page piece is going to be the same level of
Mhm.
work that goes into it. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes people want a half page piece that's just a character with no background. And it's like, well, I can knock that out in half a day. So I'm going to charge you half my day rate. Or like, versus somebody who's like, I want a full page that has 8 characters on it. And, so that kind of thing is like, well, that's going to take me 4 days of work to do. And I don't want to charge the same thing in both cases. That's not fair to me or the people paying for it necessarily. Um, so yeah, and I encourage artists to frequently take a look at their rates and see
mm,
like, is this work, is this um, is this fair to me and the commissioner based on the amount of time it's taking me to do these pieces, um, based on the amount of experience I've gained, based on how much my art has improved since I
mm,
started. Like, I hope I hope more artists start to take a close look at their rates and recognize when they're undercharging. Because I definitely was when I started in the scene. Now I feel like I'm at a comfortable spot to sit for a while. Like, um, uh, but a lot of people just way undercharged. Like I see people commissioning or like doing like full color character, full body character commissions for $20.
mm,
It's like I know they're not spending an hour on that.
mm.
And if they're knocking it out an hour, great for them. But I still think they should charge more because like you also shouldn't be penalized for being fast.
Right.
Like if your stuff is good and you're fast at it, like don't charge less. Like still charge the value of that work.
Right.
But a lot of people undercharge, and some of that I think is like they think that's all they can pay,
Mm,
or they all they can charge. But yeah, I think just looking at it frequently and being willing to change it and recognize like when you're freelance, you don't have a boss. Like nobody says
mm.
like, oh, you're only allowed to change your rates 2 times a year, or like at the end of the fiscal cycle, or like just if you think they should be different, change them, and don't screw over existing clients. Like if you have an existing contract, obviously honor that rate. Um, but for net new, like change it whenever it feels
Mm.
right to change it.
Yeah. The other thing I was thinking about with the day rate that I like is that it's, you have a sense, but you get the complexity of the piece is sort of described to you, so you have a sense of how many days it's going to take, and so you can multiply day rate times number
Hmm.
of days, and it's quick math. Other systems where it's like based off of the size of the piece, then also have like this sort of like a la carte model that goes on top of it of like plus this much if you want a background, plus this much if there's
Yeah.
multiple characters, plus this much if you want, and then it becomes harder necessarily to have a sense of like where are we at the beginning of this? Like what's our price going to be? Let's look, add up like you have an
Yeah.
itemized list as opposed to okay, I've read the brief, I have a sense, 2 days, something like that.
Hmm.
It's nice.
Yeah. And for me, it also helps me just plan how much work I can take on too. Because like if I know I can do about a day's worth of work in a week, sometimes if I'm crunching, like I could do like up to 3 days worth of work in a week, but that's like really like pushing it and I
Mm,
can't, that's not sustainable to do all the time. I know like, okay, well, if people have paid me for 12 days worth of work, I basically have um like I've got several months of work
right.
set out, and I shouldn't take any new commissions on during that time, or I should tell people, hey, I can do this commission, but is it okay if I don't start working on it until 2 months from now
Right.
or whatever. Um, so it just helps me plan stuff too and not overwhelm myself with work that I've taken on because I'm like excited about it or because it's
Mm,
like I fear of like not having commissions like am
yeah.
I going to have any work next month? Well, if I now know that I'm doing this amount of work, like I'm already getting paid for the time for next month. So
Hmm.
don't worry about then, we can look out further or whatever. So just planning is easier and not kind of screwing myself over or
Yeah.
screwing clients over either with like having to um um push deadlines too many times or things like that. But I do appreciate when clients are flexible because like even with planning, and this is the same for writing, drawing, whatever it is. Life happens and the world happens, and sometimes you got to flex.
Yeah.
So
Uh, all right, Jay, and I come to you with a request for aid, for assistance here, because I've reminded myself in what I was talking about earlier of, um, you tell the artist like, all right, this is what I want, and then you get a sense of the detail, and then you
yeah,
figure out your rate. But this all revolves around the assumption that the commissioner knows how to do an art brief of any kind. And
sure. Oh yeah,
I am I apologize constantly to people because I'm like I'm so bad at trying to, because this is again one of those things that like it's not like there's a model, or maybe there is and I just don't
yeah,
know it, of like what do you look for in an art brief, or like what advice can you
yeah,
give to people who are commissioning to put together an art brief that the artist is going to look at it and at least have a sense of where we're starting, as opposed to like
yeah,
we got to go back and forth for a while before we can actually tease this thing
yeah.
out.
Well, I think on the very front end, like all the basics, like the kinds of things that you might see from artists who break out their commission rates by like the add-ons,
Mm,
right? Like the a la carte stuff, like background, number of characters, like even if the artist doesn't commission by that stuff, those are the kinds of details that are like really important on the front end, like that are sort of easy to hit on, right? Like, okay, this is a piece with two characters, it has a background, it's black and white, um, and those are like the fundamentals. It's going to be published on an A5 um, full page spread.
mm,
Those kinds of like technical details are super important because they're not just going to dictate what gets drawn, but also like what when I make my canvas to start this piece, what size do I need to make?
mm.
I'm not going to start thumbnailing if I don't know the ratio of the page or whatever. I don't want to draw like a A5 page and then somebody tell me like, oh, it's a 16 by 3 like super wide angle shot, and I'm like, I can't turn this into that. I have to start over. Um, that stuff's like really important on the front end. And those are like the basics.
Mm,
And then beyond that, it's the like whatever description you can give. Um, uh, if there's like a tone you're trying to get, that's
mm,
helpful. If you want color and you're um, your book has like a color theme,
Mm.
or whatever publication it's going in has a theme, and you want the art to go along with that, like provide swatches or like hex numbers or whatever for colors so that um, the artist isn't doing colors that then you want to change later, or so that way they're just like on theme right from the
Mm.
get-go. Or if you know a kind of general vibe, like I saw this Kincaid painting, or
Oh.
like or this uh God, why did I say Kincaid? That's a poison in my brain. That's a hilarious example. Um, but I saw this piece from one of my favorite artists on Twitter or whatever that has like an awesome color story. Share a link to that,
Mm.
um uh and like obviously not like don't copy this piece. I don't want this drawing, but the colors in it are great. And for some artists like me who are colorblind, like I'm going to color pick from that, and it's
Mm.
going to make things so much easier for me to get you your piece when you want it. So because I can build a color palette out of that, or some apps like Procreate, you can actually drag and drop a picture into the color panel and it will create a palette for you and stuff like that. So,
Really?
yeah, that's one of the newer features too.
That's my new
Um,
Procreate tip I've learned today. Excellent.
yeah. Um, so that kind of thing's helpful. And also another thing I love, and I think other artists like this too, is if you have like if you have a kind of a composition or a character pose or something that you envision and you're having a hard time describing it, or maybe you can describe it, but it's hard for the artist to interpret that accurately. Um, and you can't draw, like if you can do a stick figure drawing
Mm.
or like a wireframe, like literally like draw a box here and a triangle here and a circle here, and then label them A, B, C, and then a key that's like A is the character, B is a comet, C is like their gears sitting on top of a rack, or like, that kind of thing. That stuff is super helpful too, because it's like, okay, like um, I can literally take that thumbnail you made and put it on my canvas and lower the transparency and like pencil over that, so I kind of like am giving you the layout that you want,
Mm.
and that kind of thing. And it doesn't have to be storyboard quality, or it can literally, like I've gotten some great thumbnails from some clients, um, Chris Longhurst, who I've worked with on some stuff for the map is not the territory, um, has commissioned a couple of things from me, and in both cases given me like stick figure drawings that are like awesome starting points. Like, oh, I understand exactly what you want now. Like, this isn't, we're not going to publish this,
Yeah.
but like, okay, now I get what you're describing. I think uh, don't discount your art ability as the commissioner. Um, uh, don't let that keep you from like giving a sketch.
Yeah.
I know awesome artist Nala Wu um, uh, has a few clients who have done that for them, and they've talked about how that's great too.
I've
Yeah,
never even considered doing like even a really simple wireframe sort of thing like that. That that would be so much easier than me I'm trying to like type out these like elaborate
yeah,
scenes or even just like the pose of the character. And I'm like, I don't know how to. I'm not a prose writer, so like even the idea of
uh-huh.
like trying to evocatively describe a scene is not something that comes naturally to me as I'm writing. So I'm like, God, I really hope that this makes sense. And I always end
Yeah.
every email with that. Like, I'm so sorry if this doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, do I mean like that sort of like napkin sketch idea,
Yeah.
or post-it note, whatever, like do that. And if your post-it note you feel like isn't clear, or the sketch you've done, draw arrows that point to the things and you're like, this is a sword, like that's excellent. Like I think that's super helpful for artists. I love it when clients do that. So
I gotta
yeah.
remember that. Even if it is truly, truly horrible, it is still helpful, right? It's data, it's
Yeah,
information that helps. Because otherwise, you're just working in a void, right? Otherwise, you're just like, wow, I really have to sort of interpret like what this is supposed to be or what
yeah.
the commissioner's intent is.
Well, and the teacher side of me, the artist likes to teach drawing and stuff. Also, one of my favorite things about telling commissioners to do that is that I'm also in a very stealth way teaching you how to start drawing because
Ah,
doing that wireframe, doing that super rough sketch, that's thumbnailing. Like
mm,
that's and when you draw a square to represent where a character's at, or a triangle for a mountain, or like these super simple shapes, that's drawing 101. That's like, don't start drawing the buttons, start drawing the shape of the form,
right.
like overall the general shape of the thing that the details on. You're actually learning to draw by doing those little sketches. So
You've tricked us all.
I
Excellent.
have, yeah.
That's super cool. That's really cool. Well, that is a very helpful piece of advice that I will carry with me moving forward. Um, well, we're at about like an hour here. This has been fantastic. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you really wanted that you were really itching to talk about?
I think one other thing that I am interested in talking about, and maybe it's a bigger conversation for maybe for another
Mm.
time, but I do one thing I've been thinking about lately is trends in art and tabletop.
Oh, okay.
So I don't know if you want to get into that, or save that, or
I'm down to talk about
uh,
trends in tabletop art. That would be cool
yeah.
for me.
So one of the things that I think since I've kind of entered the scene that is interesting to me, um, and that I think it is one of the stratifiers on an aesthetic level between indie and larger publisher uh, games and products, is uh, the styles of art that end up in things. And like the style that has largely dominated um, mainstream RPGs and other tabletop games and trading card games and stuff is a more like realistic rendering, like
Mm.
painterly, or not painterly, but a painted, uh, realistic rendering kind of style. Um, and it's a highly technically skilled
Mm.
method of making art, and there's a lot of incredible artists doing that. And I don't knock that style itself or the artists making it. I think I envy their ability to do art in that way sometimes, especially because of it requires a lot of ability to use color well, which
Mm.
is a thing I struggle with, and part of the reason why I can't do that kind of art. So there is very transparently some jealousy from me on being able to draw in that way. But I do think that it is interesting to see how that has become this dominant style, because um, something I haven't seen a lot of people talk about, although some people do, and I think this has come up I've seen it come up in the comic scene too, with like house styles for like the big three publishers and stuff, where you get this kind of like homogenization of style,
Mm.
where some artists still find a way to make their stuff stand out. But if you flip through like the latest D&D book, um, it can be hard to say like who did which piece in it. And that's a testament to like the skill of the artist to render in such a way that is realistic to the point of like having a challenge of of differentiating from other pieces. But I think it also puts the publisher in a position of power over artists that
Mm.
I'm real uncomfortable with, because it means a lot of the time that like artists are fairly replaceable. Um, like if you are not willing to work for whatever rates they're setting, um, which I don't know some of the big publishers' rates,
Mm.
so I don't know whether or not they're paying fairly. I hope they are. A lot of people work for those places for a long time, and I I hope that means that like they're paying well enough to stay
Yeah.
there. Um, but I do think that it takes some of the power away from artists to negotiate rates or to like push back on like, hey, you've been paying this rate for the past 5 years, 10 years, whatever. Like, it's time to increase it, um, because the publisher can just like there are a lot of people capable of working that style who put in the time and effort it takes to really um, work in that
Mm,
way, who may be willing to work for whatever their base rate is because they're the publisher they are, and that name carries enough weight that there's enough people applying who aren't going to consider how that rate compares to somewhere else. Um, and I think that's a thing that faces writers and editors and stuff too. Um, but I think style, um, a art direction that homogenizes the style in the way that a lot of the big publishers does, I think is damaging both in terms of like robbing us of just seeing some interesting artistic perspectives in these books,
mm.
but also like it's a method of control, I think too. And I don't think it's a coincidence that it is built around a hyper realistic kind of rendering that has a sort of like uh, Kantian sense of um, like standards of beauty. Like
Mm,
what is art? Well, art is neoclassical painting, like
mm,
and not uh, um, Morkborg covers um, or some of the stuff that people are doing with like really graphic um, uh, high contrast art and
mm.
stuff like that. Like um, so uh, I don't know. I think that that's one of the reasons why I love working in uh, with the people I work with is that there's so many unique styles and approaches to art, and even not even just um, across the scene, but like in individual titles sometimes, and in
Mm.
ways that like with with the right team like can still work. It like even if the individual styles are different aesthetically, it still somehow ties together in a way that is intriguing and fun. Um, yeah, so that's a thing I think about a lot that I wish there was a little more discussion around.
That is really fascinating. You know, it's one of those things that sort of just through osmosis I have absorbed but never really consciously thought about of the sort of like, oh yeah, there is sort of a style that is commonly seen. You kind of I've got like a million thoughts that are coming into my
Yeah.
head based off of this. It's really fascinating too. So it reminds me of a recent commission experience I had when I was commissioning Eddie York to do the character art in Nova. Um,
Uh-huh.
Eddie does that style you're describing, very realistic, detailed digital painting, or just I guess painting. You don't have to
Yeah,
qualify it.
sure.
Um, and I remember seeing that, being blown away. Eddie did a piece in that style, and I was like, yeah, this is really badass. But the thing that like lingered in my head was that he sent me rough like silhouette sketches of like different
Uh-huh.
shapes that we could take these mechs in, and like with just like some color, like swaths of color over things. And I was like, I kind of like that. I kind of want that, which is
Uh-huh.
so the opposite direction. But it was really hard, and we had a good conversation where we moved back in that direction. But it was one of those weird things where like Eddie sent me this thing, and I was like, it's beautiful. Obviously, this is
Yeah.
technically a gorgeous piece of art, but like, is it weird that I want the thing that's, I don't know, maybe your warm up or your sketch, like that style is the thing that is really interesting to me. Like I tend to I like these style. I wish I had it handy. It's in my big box of zines, but there's an artist who did all of the art for a zine that was up on Zine Quest year 2, I think, called 17th Century. Like it's an
Okay.
OSR thing. And the artist's whole style is basically just kind of like constantly scratching with like a pencil essentially and creating
Yeah.
all the shapes with that. And I'm like, that's so cool. That sticks out to
Uh-huh.
me. But and of course, I can't name the artist off the top of my head, which does not help lend evidence to my case. But I remember that artist, right? Like as
Yeah.
opposed to the swaths of others. And it's interesting that there is this like big push towards a particular style, and the other thing that it reminds me, or the other thing that came to my mind, and this is something maybe I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, is you know um, within an artist, styles that they can capture and work in is interesting to me, because like when I see an artist with like their commission rate or something like that, they usually have a couple of pieces and they're all of a very similar style. And but
Uh-huh.
then they will say something like I'm open to other styles and stuff. And that's the thing that really fascinates me, because I see, typically I see an artist with a particular style and I go, that's what they do. And I don't even think
Hmm.
about or comprehend the idea that they could probably do other things. Like,
Yeah.
much like me as a writer, I write a particular type of game, but I could write another type of game if I wanted. Like,
Yeah.
that translation doesn't happen in my head. Um, yeah, I'm just curious what your, like, what your thoughts are about, like, that idea of, like, artists
Yeah.
holding multiple styles and things like
Yeah. I
that.
mean, I think that's a really interesting it plays into a mix of like the um wide breadth of skills that artists have to render things in all different types of styles. But also sort of like some artists love working in multiple styles because they don't want to get bored with any one thing.
Mm,
Some artists only want to work in a single style because it's the only thing they enjoy doing, or it's the thing that pays best, or like, for whatever reason, they stick to that thing. And some artists, like for marketability, feel like they have to do all the styles, right? They've got to appeal to anybody, any potential client possible. Um, and I think depending on it almost feels like luck sometimes who sees your stuff. um like all of those apply. Like
yeah.
there's an argument to be made for work for only working in a single style and trying to market yourself as that and have like a very consistent brand to your work that is recognizable no matter where it's at. um uh but then there's the argument that like, well, if people don't really know your work, like make work that anybody can latch
Mm,
onto, and then maybe you sort of, as you see which thing is getting more attention, do that. But like, are that all then sort of ties into like, well, are you doing this because you're good at drawing and you just want to do it as a job because you're good at it, or like, are you making art that has a deeper meaning to you,
mm,
that you want to make sure you're doing in a way that is representative of like the expression you want to put out? And they're all valid perspectives. But like, I think it's important for artists to like consider like, why am I doing this?
mm,
And what, for that reason, what art of mine should I do? Like,
yeah.
should I stay open? Should I do a particular style? I struggle with that a little bit because I have a few different styles, at least to my eye. I don't know if it's seen the same way by others necessarily, but like I will work kind of the strata from like something that is kind of like that 10 million HP planet
Mm,
cover that is very bombastic, Silver Age comics, bright colors, super bold inks, harping on like the Jack Kirby school of
mm,
illustration with all the Kirby crackle and stuff like that. Um, Very little in the way of like detailed line work. It's mostly big, blocky, chunky shapes. Um, and then on the other hand, I've got the stuff I've been doing for this Morkborg campaign setting book that is more in the like early 19th or early 20th century illustrator kind of like very fine engraving style
mm,
line work, super detailed, kind of like also the Wonder Home cover that I did, the
yeah.
line work for that, where I think generally the way I approach drawing underneath that tends to be the same between both, but then like my technique for inking is really what pulls them in different directions. Um, uh, but yeah, so sometimes I wonder like, are these two things, do they work on my
Mm,
portfolio site together? One is more comics, one is more like classical black and white illustration. Um, and I hope they do because I like doing both of them. So for me, I've sort of decided like I don't know if this hurts or helps my marketability or whatever, but like these are the things I want to draw, and I
Yeah.
hope people commission me for them. You know, like um, I do a lot of weird, chunky ink stuff for Sandy Pug um, games, uh, and then some stuff that other people have commissioned me for. I've tried to push on like, okay, I want to do something really beautiful and subtle,
Mm.
um, but now I'm like, or I got to, and then we'll be working on soon as writing is wrapping up on Exquisite Corpse, the Exquisite Corpse and Maggot's Keep. Um, that sort of is a bit of a bridge between the two,
Mm.
where I'm doing a little bit of subtle stuff in it, but then also sometimes it's uh, bold and flat and uh, so yeah, so I think about that
Yeah.
too, but I think I've kind of landed in like I've got a spectrum I'm working in, and it's
Mm-hmm.
not as all over the place before. I did when I first started working the scene, I was doing some realistic rendering stuff. I have a few of those pieces in the um, Creative Comrades pack of art.
Yeah.
Um, but I don't really work like that anymore because I don't like to. Like I was doing it because it was like, well, this is what's in these books, so I guess I
Right.
got to draw like that. Um, but yeah,
It's a really fascinating idea, the I hadn't really thought too much about it until you mentioned it, that there is sort of this general push, this general like style that is very popular, very much out there, and the ramifications on how artists decide what they're going to move forward with their own styles and like exactly said, the sort of power dynamics that are involved in it. That's a rabbit hole that I feel like
yeah,
I
right.
want to get like a whole bunch of artists to like
Yeah,
talk about
yeah, it'd
that.
be
That would be
cool to have a lot of perspectives on it. Yeah,
yeah, fascinating. Fascinating. Very cool. Uh my brain is on fire right now with all this
yeah,
stuff. I love it. Um cool. Excellent. Well, that feels like a good wrapping up point as we consider
sure.
like the art direction of the scene and
Yeah,
where
what
we're
is
gonna.
art if not a constant existential crisis? So,
Perfect. Speaking of Exquisite Corpse, by the way, I am so excited about
yeah.
that. As I was
Oh,
looking
I'm
through your
super excited for
portfolio,
it
I was like,
too.
oh, that's gonna be so good. It's gonna be so good.
Yeah, yeah. I've been reading some chunks of what everybody's turning in with their drafts, and I'm just like, oh, I can't wait to draw this. Like, so yeah, I'm wrapping up this Morkborg book, uh, and then I'm doing a logo for Ray that I'm wrapping up for Sword Queen Games. I'm stoked on. And then I'm going to take like a week off, and then it's going to be Exquisite Corpse until like I don't know midsummer or something like that. We'll see how long it all takes, but I'm stoked on that. And a quick tie into early conversation, something I'm super excited about is um, all of the pieces, with the exception of the cover and maybe a few interiors, but we're talking at least like 50 pieces of art are going to be um, a few months post final publication of the book, released under Creative Comrades. So it'll be a huge library of
Wow.
great fantasy horror art for folks to have access to. So we're really stoked on that too,
Holy
as being
cow.
part of that project. Yeah.
That is super cool. What a boon to everybody. What and that's very, very exciting. Excellent. Wow, I'm excited to
Yeah.
see that. So, you shouted out a couple of things. Where else can folks find you online or anything like
Sure.
that?
So yeah, I'm on Twitter at JN Butler Art. And that's generally where you can find me in most places, but most of the time I'm on Twitter. And then my portfolio site with my commission rates and links to um, uh, Creative Comrades and my art collection that's licensed under that. That's all at jnb.art. Um, and also, I've got an itch storefront, jnb.art or itch. I don't know how the URLs go for those. jnbutler.art.itch.io, I think. I don't know. That's linked on my portfolio site too.
Yeah.
But I've got a Quest creature supplement on there, but also I have a commission contract template on there that I hope folks take advantage of. If you're an artist or writer, take a little tweaking as a writer or editor to some of the language, but It's free and open to everybody to use however they want. Either as like you can use it verbatim for your commission contracts, or if you want to cut it up and
Mm.
pull the stuff you like and write in stuff, to replace other things. It's just, based on my experience using contracts, I put that together for people to use, and yeah, so that's there for free. Snag it and take advantage of it.
Awesome. Very cool resource. Well, everybody, this has been a blast. I hope you all had fun, and I know I learned a lot. So
I,
this
I had a
was
blast.
this,
Yeah, thanks for having me on here.
of course, absolutely. I want to get a giant panel of artists to get together to talk about this trend thing you've mentioned because
That'd be cool.
I feel like that's a big topic. I feel like that's something that
Yeah.
like I want to like have people start talking about it and then I just sit back and just watch as all of it as that conversation happens. I feel like it would be very interesting.
Yeah.
Um, well, hope maybe for a future thing. Uh, Thank you so much everybody for joining us and watching or listening if you're on the podcast later on. All the links that were mentioned will be in the descriptions of the various things that you are either watching or listening to. Um, Once again, I continue the tradition of not looking up who next week's guest is before we start, so there will be a guest. I don't remember who it is, though, so keep an eye on Twitter. I'll shout out about it. Otherwise, have yourselves a wonderful rest of the day, morning, afternoon, evening, wherever it is you are, and we will talk to you later. Bye, everybody.
See ya.